Hello and welcome to the Garian Tabletop. I am Garian Rivan. This is a Far Waste devlog. Today I'll be going through the various pre-adventuring jobs that players can pick, as well as giving you an idea of what life in the Far Wastes is like. This topic was requested by a viewer, and if you have requests, ask away in the comments. Remember, this game is a work in progress. Put your feedback in the comments or join us on the Garian River Discord, linked in the description. All the release rules are on the Far Waste Lab, also linked. So what does life in the post-poc actually look like? First off, most settlements, at least human ones, are usually built from the remains of the peripheries, reconstructed from the half-disassembled ruins of pre-poc towns, or rarely built from scratch near some valuable post-poc resource or trade route. Despite their extensive pre-poc use, very few arcologies are still occupied. So let's go through these. Arcologies, I've mentioned before, they're a theoretical form of isolated, self-sustaining settlement. None exist in the real world today. They're intended to provide everything their inhabitants need, like power, food, water, work, entertainment, residences, everything. All without the need for private transportation like cars. Before the apocalypse, the United Empire of Great Britain was facing a resource shortage, as was every world power, and one way they attempted to mitigate this was by building arcologies. It made sense. It helped. Reducing fuel usage built from the former sprawling cities and towns, with the added bonus of being highly defensible in the event of war. Their arcologies resemble massive snow globes, like huge. With an armoured base like the plinth of a snow globe and a tough glass-like sphere over the rest, people lived on separated layers up inside, making the most of the spherical space. At least 90% of the UE population lived in these arcologies, sprinkled across the length and breadth of their territory, the land in which the Far Waste game takes place. The issues came, of course, with the apocalypse. Despite being armoured, defensive, built to survive war, almost no one in the world was fully prepared for the sheer destructive power of all-out nuclear war. Some arcologies were outright obliterated, reduced to glowing craters. Gamva, home of the Gamvarites, was penetrated and irradiated, but most of the others suffered extensive damage either externally or internally. Turns out an isolated, self-sustaining settlement with the footprint of a city and stretching into the sky is fragile. Earthquakes from nuclear detonations, damage to physical parts during the salvo that ended the world, or just wear and tear over decades of people trying to survive. I'll talk more another time about what's become of them now, but suffice to say that most people don't live in them, at least not for long. Peripheries, as mentioned in the prologue of my story The Ancestors Lab, linked in the description, were satellite towns built outside of the arcologies. Although the arcologies themselves were self-sustaining and largely isolated, that doesn't mean no one worked or lived outside them. Military personnel, secret lab staff, even delivery drivers. They were all based outside of the arcologies to allow more secrecy and freedom of movement. Peripheries are a lot more like traditional towns. Houses, shopping, streets, cars. Not that many people drove. In the post-poc, they proved to be really good foundations for the survivors. Small enough not to have been directly targeted in the apocalypse, large and built enough to support a population. They weren't left undamaged, but repairs are doable. I mentioned that the arcologies were built by disassembling existing cities and towns. Recycling and reuse was a very big thing in the pre-poc, and they still ran out of resources, but it meant that they basically rebuilt their entire infrastructure and population centres. What towns and scattered buildings remain in the post-poc are either former sprawling cities gutted down to a skeleton, or just out-of-the-way settlements that were either overlooked or left when the government was harvesting for the arcologies. These make good shelters for small groups, travellers, pirates, or monsters. Call it a roll of the dice. Some genera, like Lutran, actually prefer these gutted buildings and forgotten towns to more civilized areas. Other genera, like the Kraken and the Hakala, have built their own settlements from scratch. Imbued with their newfound intelligence, most Thalborn and Fishkind genera have towns that suit their particular needs. There is some cohabitation, even alongside humans in rare cases, and this becomes more common on trade routes. In stark contrast to the isolated, self-sustaining arcologies, most post-poc settlements struggle to get by on their own. Scarcity of good farming land, hazardous wildlife, genera conflict, rampant radiation. Not necessarily an any day could be our last tough, but scavenging from the past and trading for resources are vital to most town survival. Clean water is a tricky thing to find, so sources of that are prime locations for new towns, as well as areas less commonly hunted by large creatures. That second bit in particular is a limiting factor on colonising the dry seabed of the North Atlantic, the titular Far Wastes. Positively teeming with Thalassian monsters, only the Thalborn seem confident building their lives that far out. Another living situation many adopt is as nomads, caravans or travelling camps. Particularly those who engage in trading tend to move around a lot, but it also helps for Thalborn and Fishkind to stay mobile when living in areas patrolled by the Vanguard militia. And such lands are generally safer. The avant-garde Malays do a pretty good job of keeping the monsters at bay. Just a shame they see most non-humans likewise as monsters. Settlements and groups exchange scraps, supplies, tools, weapons, technology. Some groups spend their time scavenging ruins or long-abandoned facilities, hoping to find helpful tech or valuables. Some people travel great distances, such as from the east. The Far Wastes isn't a setting of doom and gloom. The people in the post-poc are surviving, making the best of their world and making allies and enemies, building for themselves and their future generations. It's not easy, but it's the post-apocalypse. What do you expect? Now that I've hopefully given you a better idea of how life looks, we can talk more about how it impacts your character. I'm still designing the economy, item prices and all that, but what I do have for you are jobs. A job is what your character did before going on the adventure you play in the campaign. You choose this at character creation and then can't change it later. Each job grants skill interests, some skill points, and a job trait that exemplifies whatever was gained during their life before the campaign. First off, there are actually two lists of jobs, pre-poc and post-poc. For obvious reasons, only pre-poc humans can take pre-poc jobs. Potentially some robots could have been around back then, might add a thing saying androids can take them in rare circumstances, but for now, just pre-poc humans. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every single option exhaustively. Here are the two lists. I'll explain what they add and highlight a few of the traits. If there are any potential jobs you can think of that I've missed, please put them in the comments. We can always add more. First, we'll look at an example from each list, pre-poc military and ruin diving. In both examples, as in all jobs, you gain interest and 2 skill points in a specific skill. This is the skill used most by your job. Fieldcraft for the military, scavenging for ruin diving. For the other skills, they differ slightly. All pre-poc jobs give interest and a skill point in pre-poc. And just to clarify, playing a pre-poc human doesn't mean you have to have a pre-poc job. Obviously, if you were frozen or whatever and thawed immediately before the campaign, that'd strongly suggest a pre-poc job. But if they're from the pre-poc but have lived in the post-poc for a bit, they can have a post-poc job. Pre-poc jobs then give a choice of skills, and you pick one of 3. You get interest and a skill point in that. By comparison, normal jobs, you choose 2 of 4. So pre-poc or post-poc, you'll always get a total of 3 interests and 4 skill points. The skills between which you choose vary by the job. They'll all be on the Far Wastes lab, linked in the description if you want to read the full choices. Job traits are quite varied. Some are flat numerical changes or mechanical effects, some are roleplay based, some are entirely dependent on the GM. In our examples, pre-poc military gives bygone training. You were trained by the military in a period of strife when it was expected the world would boil over into conflict, but hopefully not go nuclear. Oh well, at least you got some useful expertise. You can survive on half the normally required food and drink for 3 days without suffering any ill effects. That one obviously has more impact if you're going for the full survival mechanics. Oh, and to clarify something else, your job and your class are unconnected. You could be pre-poc military and a chemist, healthcare and a soldier, whatever you want. Ruin diving gives the I know a good spot trait. After how long you've spent exploring dilapidated ruins, hazardous arcologies or rusted scrapyards, you always know a spare place nearby to retreat in case of emergency. When in or near an area familiar to you, you can always find at least one sheltered location. No promises that it's uninhabited, however. That one relies on the GM, but GMs should always take note of their players' jobs. As a building block for your character, it's always cool to get to use the trait from your life before the adventure. Planning for your players to use theirs helps them feel more connected to the character and the world. Chemical science, both pre and post-poc, have effectively the same job trait. You learn a compound formula exactly like a chemist, with actual chemists getting an additional one. Engineering gives you the glow on all checks related to repairing broken inanimate objects. Solitude is sort of the lack of a job, intended for characters who lived by themselves. This lets you give up the interest and 2 skill points in fieldcraft to instead choose 2 additional skills of the 5 available. The advantage there is having interest in more skills makes it easier to improve the skills you find useful, as you need to have interest to apply skill points. Piracy is the Farwaste term for bandits, raiders, or brigands. They get the glow on checks related to recognizing crime and criminals. The last one I'll specifically mention here, and remember they're all on the Farwaste Lab if you want to read the others, is Gamva. Outside of the pre-poc jobs, this is currently the only one limited to a specific genus, obviously, Gamverites. The job trait is Special Mission. Some Gamverites leave Gamva and give no hint about what exactly they used to do there. They just set out Gamveriting about, pursuing whatever mission gave them reason to leave. Your GM picks a special mission for you that you should keep as secret as possible from the other players. Good luck, Gamverite. This is to lean into the mysterious nature of the Gamverites, and I think it's a bit of fun. That's probably enough about life and jobs, but if you have ideas, please put them in the comments. This topic was requested by a viewer, so if there's anything in particular you want to devlog on next, feel free to ask. You should join us on the Gary and Riva Discord, check out the Farwaste Lab, and become a member on Patreon, even as a free user, to show your support and help build a community. All of that is linked in the description. And please share this round to your friends and gaming groups so that we can continue to grow and improve. Thank you very much for watching, subscribe for more Farwaste devlogs or for board games, card games, miniatures, and TTRPGs like this. And I will catch you later.